My father used to say that the things worth protecting never asked to be protected. They just existed, quietly and completely, and you either saw them for what they were or you didn't. He said a lot of things like that, quiet, certain things that only made sense to me later, after he was gone, and I had no one left to ask what he meant. He was the kind of man who planted ideas in you and left you to grow them yourself. I used to find it frustrating. Now I understand it was the only way he knew to give me something that would last. He died in March. By July I was on a plane to Mexico. My mother handled grief the way she handled most things, with logistics. There were forms to fill, accounts to consolidate, a school enrollment to finalize before August. She kept herself busy and she kept me at a certain remove, not out of cruelty, but because she didn't know what to do with a 13-year-old boy who had stopped speaking in full sentences. She fed me. She made sure I slept. She watched me from the kitchen doorway sometimes when she thought I couldn't see her, and her face in those moments had something in it I recognized because I felt it myself, a kind of bewildered permanence, the shock of understanding that this was not a condition that would lift, that you would carry this weight for the rest of your life, and the only question was how. So she called Chava, my grandfather, a man I had never met. The arrangement was presented to me as a gift, a summer trip, time with family, reconnecting with heritage. That was the word she used. Heritage. What it actually was, I understood even then, was a place to put me while she figured out how to breathe again. I didn't blame her. I was barely breathing myself. The flight from Kansas City to Hermosillo took 3 hours. The drive from Hermosillo to San Javier took 2 more. I remember watching the landscape change through the window as we drove, the flat brown sprawl of the border corridor giving way to something older and rougher, red-orange hills going dark in the afternoon light, a country that looked like it had been burned down and grown back 100 times and didn't particularly care whether you noticed. I had my Game Boy in my jacket pocket. I didn't take it out. I just looked at the land and tried to understand what my father had seen in it that made him talk about it the way he did, in the years before he got sick, in the stories he told about his childhood that I only half listened to because you never think the stories will stop. San Javier was not a town so much as a cluster of things that had agreed to stay near each other. A market square with 3 vendors and a fountain that no longer ran. A church with a cracked bell tower. A cantina that smelled of smoke and corn masa even from the road. A gas station that doubled as a general store. The kind of place that exists in the space between other places, that the main roads go around rather than through, that maps include mostly out of thoroughness. Chava's ranch sat 4 kilometers east of town down a dirt track that had no business being called a road, on a flat piece of ground hemmed in by scrub and mesquite, and the long shadow of a ridge to the north that ran east to west like the spine of something enormous laid down to sleep. He was standing in the doorway when we pulled up. Tall for his age, he was in his late 60s then, though he moved like a man who still remembered being 40. Wide shoulders, slightly rounded now but still carrying the structure beneath. A thick gray mustache. He was wearing a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow and boots that had been repaired so many times the original leather was more memory than material. He watched me climb out of the truck with an expression I couldn't read. Not cold. Not warm, something careful, something that had been waiting. "Alejandro," he said. Nobody called me Alejandro, not even my father. "Alex," I said. He nodded like he was filing that away. Then he put his hand on my shoulder just for a moment, just briefly, and turned me toward the house. "Come, your cousins will show you your room." Memo was 11 and approximately made of electricity. He had his grandfather's build in miniature, and a wrestling mask pushed up on his forehead like a headband, which he apparently wore at all times including, I would later discover, to sleep. He spoke no English and I spoke maybe 20 words of Spanish, but he communicated entirely through gesture, demonstration, and sheer volume, and within 10 minutes of my arrival I had been shown the barn, the chicken coop, the rusted-out tractor that served as a climbing structure and possibly also as a local landmark, and a particular rock near the east fence that he seemed to regard as personally significant. I understood none of the context. I understood all of the enthusiasm. There was something clarifying about a person who was simply and completely present in his own joy, and I felt something begin to loosen in my chest that I hadn't known was knotted. Luna was 14, and the opposite of Memo in almost every way: deliberate, watchful, fluent in English, and deploying it sparingly, as if words were a resource she was careful not to waste. She showed me to a small room at the back of the house with a cot and a window that looked north toward the ridge. On the windowsill someone had placed a ceramic figure, a small creature, four-legged, with bat-like wings folded tight against its back, and a long snout with oversized eyes painted in gold leaf. Blue and green, very old, the paint worn smooth at the edges. "What's that?" I asked. "El Chupacabra," she said, as if it were obvious. "Every house has one, for luck," she paused, "or to keep them away, depends on who you ask." I'd heard of the Chupacabra. Everyone had. The goat sucker. The thing that turned up in grainy photographs and rural panic from here to Puerto Rico, the creature found standing over livestock drained of blood out in the desert dark. The kind of thing adults told you wasn't real in a tone that suggested they weren't entirely sure. I looked at the ceramic figure for a moment. Something in its proportions was different from the creature I'd imagined from the descriptions, less monstrous, more compact. The wings were wrong for a bat. The eyes were wrong for a predator. "Chava believes in it?" I asked. Luna looked at the figure for a long moment. "Chava doesn't talk about what he believes," she said, and left me to unpack. I lay on the cot that first night and listened to the ranch settle into quiet, the chickens going still, the wind coming down off the ridge carrying the smell of pine, and something else I couldn't identify. Something faintly animal, faintly electric, the way the air smells before lightning finds the ground. I thought about my father. I thought about the last conversation we'd had that was a real conversation, not just him being present in the room while machines did his breathing. He had wanted to bring me here himself. He had talked about it since I was small, the ranch, his father, San Javier, the ridge that caught the light a certain way in late afternoon. He wanted me to see it before he told me about it. He wanted the place to do some of the work. He ran out of time. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried since the funeral. I lay on the cot and looked at the ceiling and listened to the dark, and eventually I slept. I woke just after 2 in the morning to a sound from the barn. Not a loud sound, not a crash or a cry of something in pain. Quieter than that, a low, resonant chittering, rhythmic and sustained, almost musical, the kind of sound that shouldn't have been enough to pull a person out of a deep sleep but was. I lay still for a moment, waiting for it to stop. It didn't stop. It settled into a pattern, like something breathing in a language I didn't know, regular and assured, completely at ease with itself. I got up. I told myself I was just going to look. The barn was old, corrugated iron roof, adobe walls gone soft at the corners, a single overhead light on a chain that flickered when the generator coughed. It smelled of hay and diesel and something underneath those, something warm and alive and different from any animal smell I had encountered in my 13 years in a landlocked Midwestern city. I stood in the doorway and let my eyes adjust and waited. The creature was in the far corner, half buried in a pile of loose hay. My first thought, which I am not proud of, was that it was a dog. It had roughly a dog's proportions, 4 legs, a long body, a head slightly too large for the neck, but the resemblance to anything I had a name for stopped there. The skin that showed through the fur was charcoal gray with a faint iridescent sheen, like oil on dark water, like the wing of a beetle in sunlight. The wings were folded tight against its back. And they were not bat wings, not the membrane and bone structure I'd seen in pictures, but something different, overlapping structures that looked almost feathered and almost scaled and were neither, catching the barn light in blues and greens that shifted as the animal shifted. Its muzzle was long and slightly upturned. Its teeth, when it yawned, slow and complete, indifferent to me, were small and sharp and numerous. Then it opened its eyes. The eyes were the color of old amber, deep and warm, with pupils that didn't contract the way an animal's pupils should when light hits them. They widened instead, adjusting from the center outward as if they were gathering me in rather than filtering me out. It looked at me. Not the way prey looks at a predator, not the way a startled animal looks at a threat. It looked at me the way one person looks at another from across a room, with assessment and without panic. It made the sound again, the low chittering, not a threat, something more like an acknowledgement. I stood very still. My heart was going hard, but my hands were quiet, and I tried to let my body say what my voice couldn't, that I was not here to take anything, that I had not come into this barn with bad intentions, that whatever this was, I was willing to stand here and let it be whatever it was. The creature blinked. Both eyelids moved in sequence, outer and inner, the inner membrane sweeping side to side. Then it lowered its head onto its forepaws and looked away from me, as if deciding I wasn't interesting enough to be afraid of. I went back to the house. I lay on the cot. I did not sleep again until nearly dawn. In the morning I found Chava alone in the kitchen before the others were up, standing at the stove with his back to me, making coffee in a clay pot that looked as old as the boots. He heard me come in. I hadn't made much sound, and he didn't turn. "You went to the barn," he said. Not a question. "Yes," I said. He poured 2 cups without being asked and set one on the table in front of the empty chair. I sat down. He sat across from me. He was quiet for a long time, his hands around his cup, working through something internally, and I had the sense of a man who had been keeping a secret alone for several weeks and had decided in the small hours that he was done. "I hit something on the road," he said finally. 3 weeks ago, coming back from Hermosillo at night. Something crossed in front of the truck, large, I couldn't tell what, and I caught the edge of it. When I stopped and got out there was nothing. No body, no blood on the asphalt. But when I got home and walked to the barn, there it was, in the corner, just the young one." He paused. The mother had gone. "Gone where?" "Away," he said, in a tone that closed the subject gently but completely. "She went away." I thought about that. Sitting at the kitchen table in the early morning, the light coming through the east window, drinking coffee that was strong enough to count as a threat. I thought about the mother, injured, leading whatever was behind her away from the cub, doing what any creature does when it has something worth protecting and not enough left to protect it with, buying time with its own body, trusting the cub to whatever shelter it could find, trusting the chance that something in the barn would be safe enough. "Who's looking for it?" I asked. Chava looked at me over his cup. His eyes were dark and steady, and in that moment he looked less like the old man I'd met at the door the previous afternoon, and more like the fighter he had apparently been, not the performance of toughness, but the substance beneath performance, the real and earned thing. "Government men," he said. "American, they have been in the valley 2 weeks, asking questions in town, running equipment along the ridge at night." He set down his cup. "They have not come here yet. They will." He was right. The man arrived that afternoon. He drove a white government-contracted vehicle with Sonora plates and parked it in the yard with the careful precision of someone who was practiced at entering other people's territory and making it feel like a courtesy visit. He was Anglo, mid-40s, lean in the way that suggests a body managed as a professional instrument. He wore civilian clothes, but held himself like a man who had spent a long time in uniforms and still thought in their terms. His name was Quinn. He shook Chava's hand with warmth that was real enough to be useful, and introduced himself as a researcher with a federal biological survey. The kind of description that conveyed nothing specific while appearing to convey everything necessary. I stayed near the barn. Luna had come out to the yard and positioned herself on the porch with the specific stillness she brought to situations she had decided to observe rather than participate in. Even from a distance I could see her watching Quinn's hands, his posture, the way he angled himself relative to Chava, taking inventory. Quinn spoke with Chava for 10 minutes. I couldn't hear the words across the yard, but I could read the shape of the conversation. Quinn asking questions with the patience of a man who has asked many questions in many yards and knows that patience is the most effective form of pressure. Chava giving him the minimum answer that did not constitute a lie. Quinn pushing slightly, reframing, approaching from a different angle. Chava simply not moving, the way a door doesn't move when you lean on a wall. At the end of it, Quinn produced a card from his pocket and pressed it into Chava's hand with both of his own. Smiled the particular smile of a man who has learned that the open door works better than the battering ram, and drove away down the track. Chava watched the vehicle until it disappeared. Then he turned and walked to the barn without a word. That evening he called all three of us together at the kitchen table. He laid his hands flat on the surface, the way you lay hands on something you want to stay still. "Nobody speaks of what is in the barn," he said. "Not to anyone, not to friends, not to anyone who asks anything, understood?" Memo nodded vigorously, the mask pushed back on his forehead, his expression one of deep and genuine gravity. Luna said understood, and meant it with her whole face. I said, "Who is Quinn, really?" Chava looked at me for a moment. "A man who wants something that isn't his," he said. "That is enough." It wasn't enough, but I recognized the edge of what he was willing to say tonight, and I knew that the rest would come when it came. Over the next 3 days, I spent every hour I reasonably could in the barn. The creature Chupa, I'd started calling it in my own thinking, because you need to call something something, because the naming of a thing is the first step toward understanding what you owe it. Was cautious at first. Not aggressive. Careful in the way an animal is careful when it has been in pain, and has not yet established whether you are a source of more of the same. It watched me from the corner with those amber eyes. It let me put food inside the door. On the second day it ate while I was still present in the barn, which felt like a threshold crossed. On the third day it came close enough that I could have touched it, though I held still and did not. What I noticed across those 3 days was this: the wound on its left flank, where the truck had caught its mother, or where the impact had thrown the cub against something during the chaos of that night on the road, was healing. Not healing the way I understood healing to work, the slow, visible process of flesh and time. Healing the way a thing heals in a film sped up, except it wasn't sped up. By the third day the skin was smooth and unmarked where it had been torn. By the fourth there was no indication anything had ever happened there at all. I understood then, at least in outline, why Quinn was in the valley. I understood what a federal biological survey meant when the biology in question could do that. Memo found Chupa on the 4th day. He came into the barn looking for me and walked into a situation he had entirely not prepared for. He screamed. Chupa screamed back, the sound startling and high, more surprise than threat. I got between them with my arms out and made every gesture I knew for calm down, which neither of them honored, and for approximately 45 seconds the barn contained more chaos than its construction seemed designed to accommodate. Then Memo went still, breathing hard, starring. Chupa stared back. Some animal assessment happened between them that I couldn't follow, some exchange at a frequency below words, and Memo lowered himself very slowly to his knees and held out his hand. Chupa sniffed it, then licked it. Memo looked up at me. His face had lost all its 11-year-old performance, the bravado and the enthusiasm and the noise, and what was left was something pure and exposed. I don't have a better word for it. Pure. Luna found us together the next morning, all 3 of us in the hay, Chupa sprawled across Memo's legs with wings half open, breathing slow and deep. She stood in the doorway for a long time before she spoke. "It's real," she said. "Yes. And Quinn knows there's one here." "Chava thinks so." She looked at Chupa for a long moment, at the slow rise and fall, at the iridescent flicker of the wings in the morning light coming through the slats. Then she looked at me with the face she put on when sentiment had been registered and filed, and what remained was the problem in front of her. "Then we need a plan," she said. The plan began with Memo trying to teach Chupa to fly, which I recognized as a reasonable idea wrapped inside an 11-year-old's methodology. His reasoning, Luna translated with the resignation of someone who cannot believe she is doing this, was straightforward enough. If Chupa could fly, Chupa could get away, which was correct. The delivery system was Memo climbing the barn roof and jumping into the hay below. 6 times, 8 times, with diminishing commitment to the landing. Chupa watched this with the patient bafflement of a creature watching a human being do something that makes no evolutionary sense. Then, on about the 8th iteration, something shifted. He spread the wings fully, the complete span of them, 3 meters of structure that caught the barn light and broke it into colors past the edge of what I had names for. He ran 3 steps, beat the wings twice with a sound like a heavy flag in a gale, and launched himself hard enough to crack a board in the hay loft. He hit the far wall, came down in hay and minor indignity, shook himself. Memo applauded. I was laughing. I noticed in the same moment I noticed it that I hadn't laughed since March. It came out of me like something stored under pressure, genuine and involuntary, and for a brief moment it was almost painful. Feelings do that when they've been held sealed long enough. Then it was just laughing, and I let it be that. That was the evening Chava showed me the video. He brought an old camcorder into the barn after dinner, the kind with a tape cassette, and set it on the workbench and pressed play. The recording was 20 years old at least, grainy and underlit, the audio compressed. A wrestling ring. A fighter in a blue mask, the Relampago Azul, the Blue Lightning, Chava's ring name, which I had not known until that moment, working with a younger man, coaching him through a move. A suplex variation, technically demanding, requiring the kind of mutual understanding that only exists between 2 people who have practiced something together 10,000 times. The younger man in the video was my father. I watched it twice, 3 times. I watched the way he moved when he was healthy, relaxed in his body in a way I hadn't seen in the last 2 years of his life, loose and precise at the same time, grinning at something Chava said off camera. I watched him land the move wrong and Chava correct him with a hand on his shoulder, patient and exact, the way you correct someone you believe in and intend to keep working with. He could have gone professional, Chava said, sitting beside me on the workbench. He had the body and the instincts, better than me in some ways at certain things, but he met your mother and he chose differently. He was quiet for a moment. I never told him he was wrong. He never told me any of this, I said. He would have, Chava said. He was going to bring you here first. He wanted you to see the place before he talked about it because some things, the important ones, need to be felt before they can be understood. He was going to let San Javier explain itself. He paused. He ran out of time. I took the Game Boy out of my jacket pocket and set it on the workbench. I hadn't turned it on since Kansas City. I looked at it for a moment. Then I left it there. Chava looked at it. Keep it, he said. But no, it's a door you can close, not a door you have to live behind. Quinn came back on the 8th day. He brought 3 additional men in a second vehicle, wearing clothes designed to look civilian without quite accomplishing it, and they set up on the eastern edge of the property with scanning equipment pointed at angles that suggested they were looking for heat signatures rather than mineral deposits. Ground-penetrating survey gear, modified. I'd seen enough news footage of military search operations to recognize the shape of the machinery, even if I couldn't name the components. Chava met Quinn in the yard. I stayed close enough to hear. We have reason to believe a protected species may be sheltering somewhere on this property, Quinn said. His voice had the careful precision of a man who has practiced this particular sentence in situations like this one. We need to conduct a full survey for its protection. Everything on my property is already protected, Chava said, by me. Senor Chavez. A pause, brief and controlled. Senor Chavez, the creature we're looking for is dangerous. It requires a controlled environment where its needs can be properly managed. You mean where your needs can be properly managed, Chava said, using it. Quinn looked at him for a moment. The warmth he had led with the first visit was still present but rearranged, still warm in surface texture, cold in what it was pointed at. We'll need access to the barn, he said. My grandson is sleeping in the barn, Chava said. He is a light sleeper. I was not in the barn. I was standing behind it, listening through a gap in the adobe. I appreciated the cover. That night we moved Chupa. Luna had been walking the terrain around the ranch for a week, which I should have expected because that was the kind of person she was. She had found a cave system 2 kilometers north, accessible through a dry streambed that ran along the base of the ridge, large enough for Chupa, hidden from any ground survey below, out of range of Quinn's scanning equipment based on the direction they had been pointing it. The problem was distance and exposure. The route through the streambed was passable but slow, and Chupa had only just begun to sustain short flights, 10 meters, 20, unreliable. 2 kilometers of rough night terrain, moving fast enough to stay ahead of anyone watching, was a different problem entirely. Memo solved it with a cargo net from the barn storage and 2 fence posts. He built a stretcher, which he demonstrated by climbing into it himself. Chupa watched the construction with the expression of a creature that has been living with humans long enough to understand that we solve problems indirectly, and at some personal cost. When the stretcher was ready, he stepped into it without prompting, folded his wings, and settled down as if he had been waiting for us to sort this out. We moved at 2 in the morning. Chava carried one pole, I carried the other. Luna went ahead with a flashlight angled at the ground. Memo walked beside the net the entire way, one hand resting on the frame, talking in low, steady Spanish that I could not understand and did not need to, because the tone was the whole communication, and Chupa clearly understood the tone. The streambed was rough going in the dark. My boots filled with sand twice. The poles were harder to carry than they looked, the weight shifting as Chupa shifted, and my shoulders were burning by the halfway point. Chava moved slowly, but he moved without stopping, and I matched his pace and his silence and tried to be useful. 40 minutes to the cave entrance. Chupa stepped out of the net, sniffed the dark mouth of the cave, disappeared inside for 30 seconds. Then he came back out and sniffed Memo's hand, made the chittering sound low and sustained, went back in and lay down. He's okay, Memo said in English. His first English word as far as I had heard. I looked at him. He shrugged, trying to be casual about it and not quite managing. We walked back. The scanning equipment on the eastern edge of the property hummed into the dark, looking for something that wasn't there anymore. The 3 days that followed had the particular quality of waiting for a thing you know is coming but can't stop. All you can do is stay alert and not make the mistake that costs you. Quinn ran his survey and found nothing. By the second day, I could see the frustration working its way into his body, the careful patience still present but laboring. He spoke to Chava twice more. Chava listened fully and said very little and did not move. I went to the cave twice a day, always through the streambed, always checking my back trail, watching for any of Quinn's people who might have thought to cover the ground approach rather than the ridge. None of them did. They were thinking in terms of their equipment, which told them the streambed was impassable, and they trusted their equipment. That was their mistake, and it was a common one, trusting the instrument over the terrain. Chupa was restless in the cave. He had found flight, and the cave confined it. But he accepted the situation with a pragmatism I found remarkable in something that did not understand what a warrant was, or why humans with machines were combing the ridgeline. He lay in the dark of the cave and watched me come and go, and accepted the food I brought, and let me sit with him. On the second day he laid his head on my leg, and I held still and let the weight of it settle into me, and I stayed there for a long time. I thought about what we were doing and why it was right. I understood Quinn's argument. I had been turning it over since the first day he showed up in the yard. The idea that what Chupa carried in his biology could save human lives, that the regenerative process I'd watched close a wound in 4 days could be isolated and understood and applied to medicine. It wasn't a stupid argument. It wasn't even a malicious one. The men who come for things like this often genuinely believe in the projected outcomes, the presentations, the meetings about potential lives saved. And they are not entirely wrong that those outcomes are possible. But I had sat in the dark with Chupa and felt the weight of his head on my leg, and I knew that what Quinn was proposing was not study. Study meant observation, interaction, learning. What Quinn was proposing was extraction, taking the mechanism from the life, discarding the life when the mechanism had been analyzed and replicated, filing a report that described the process as complete. He had decided before he ever arrived in San Javier that Chupa was a resource, a biological event, a thing. He was wrong about what he was looking at. Chupa had a mother who drew hunters away from him at the cost of her own safety. He had chosen to stay in a barn full of strange-smelling humans rather than disappear into the ridge, because the barn was where the music box sound came from, the sound that meant safe, the sound that had been here before the truck and the injury and the loss. He had allowed Memo to climb into a cargo net and demonstrate stretcher mechanics with the patience of something that understood it was being helped even when it couldn't follow the method. He had a name now, which mattered, because the naming of a thing means something to the one being named even when they have no word for the concept. He was not a mechanism. The mistake Quinn was making was the same mistake people make about most things that are different from them, assuming that different means less, that unfamiliar means simple, that something you don't understand can be reduced to the part of it you can use. On the third day, Quinn got his warrant. It came from somewhere federal and high, which meant the operation had deeper roots than a spontaneous survey. The paperwork had been prepared in advance, the legal architecture built before they ever arrived in the valley. What had looked like a gradual escalation was always going to end here. He arrived at 6 in the morning with his 3 men, and a fourth who had not been with them before, older, suited, carrying the particular authority of someone who has come to finalize rather than negotiate. He met Chava in the yard. I stood behind my grandfather. Luna and Memo were at the corner of the barn. Quinn held the document with both hands. The warrant authorizes search of all structures and outbuildings on this property, he said. We'll be professional and quick. There is nothing in my barn, Chava said. We'll verify that. Chava looked at Quinn for a long moment. I watched something settle in his face, a decision made fully and without qualification, and the calm that comes after a decision rather than before it. He stepped aside. They searched the barn in 11 minutes and found nothing because there was nothing to find. I watched Quinn come back into the yard, scan the property, look toward the ridge with the flat expression of a man reassessing his available moves. He looked at me. Your grandfather is protecting something that could change medicine, he said. His voice had shifted registers, almost gentle now, almost personal, aimed at the youngest person here as the most likely entry point. Whatever you believe this is, whatever connection you think you have with it, it's a biological process, a tissue regeneration system that doesn't exist anywhere in documented science. The applications. It has a name, I said. Quinn stopped. It has a name, I said again, holding steady, and a mother who led you away from it when she had nothing left to lead with, and it chose to stay in a barn full of strangers because there was a sound there it recognized as safe. I looked at him directly. You're not taking it. Quinn was quiet for a moment. His face had settled into something that was not quite anger and not quite respect, something in between, the expression of a man who has been doing a job a certain way for a long time and has just encountered, unexpectedly, an argument he doesn't have a prepared response to. He looked at me, then at Chava, then at the ridge where the Sierra began its long rise into the blue. Extended warrant covers surrounding terrain, he said without turning. 48 hours, maybe less. We'll be here, Chava said. They drove away. Luna was already working the problem before the dust settled. 48 hours is optimistic on his end, she said when we were in the kitchen. Call it 36. We need Chupa out of the cave system and into terrain they can't survey before that. Where? I asked. She looked at Chava. There is a place, he said slowly. 2 days on horseback into the high Sierra. I knew the terrain when I was young. The ridgeline breaks every signal, too steep, too dense with iron in the rock. No satellite coverage. No roads visible for 10 kilometers in any direction. He paused. I have not been there in 30 years. But you know the way, Luna said. I know the way. I looked at him. 67 years old, a back that had been talking to him all day on the ridge walks, a body that had spent 40 years wearing the damage from a career in the ring. 2 days on horseback into the Sierra at altitude, guiding a creature through terrain that Quinn's equipment couldn't follow, and 2 days back. I looked at him, and I knew he was going to do it because it was right, and he was the kind of man who did right things regardless of the cost to himself. And I understood in that moment that this was what my father had grown up watching. This was the man whose example he had carried into Kansas City and into marriage and into fatherhood. This was what he had been trying to show me. I'll go with you, I said. No, Chava said. I'll go with you, I said again, in a tone that surprised me, quiet and certain, the tone that closes arguments rather than starting them. It was my father's tone. I heard it in my own voice and felt something shift in my chest. Chava heard it too. He was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. We left at midnight. Quinn's people had vehicles on the main road and on the eastern track, but nothing watching the streambed, because the streambed looked impassable in their imagery, and they were wrong about that, as people often are about the terrain between places. We took the 2 horses through single file, Chupa following on foot between us, low to the ground with wings folded tight. The horses were used to him. They moved without trouble. We cleared the streambed 2 kilometers north and picked up the trail Chava knew by memory in the dark. No map, no GPS, just the accumulated knowledge of a man who had ridden this country when he was young and kept it in his body the way you keep certain things. He rode ahead. I followed. Chupa moved between us, sometimes walking, sometimes catching thermals off the warmer rock faces and gliding ahead 200 or 300 meters before dropping back. He understood, I think, that we needed him close. He came back each time without being called. The first night we camped in a rock shelter at 2,000 meters, a shallow overhang that blocked the wind but not the stars. Chava made a fire, small and precise, and heated tortillas and beans from the packs, and we ate without talking. Chupa lay at the edge of the firelight with his wings slightly spread, watching the dark around us with his amber eyes, calm and alert and completely at ease in a way that made me understand he had been in mountains before. This was not strange terrain to him. This was home terrain. After a while Chava said, "Your father was afraid when he first left." I looked at him across the fire. "Not of Mexico," he said. "He loved Mexico. He was afraid he would come back and find it had become something he didn't recognize, or that he had become something it didn't recognize. So he stayed away. He told himself he was building something first, something to come home to, something that would make the return feel earned. But time," he stopped. "He ran out of time." "He never talked about being afraid," I said. "Men of his generation did not," Chava said, not bitterly, just accurate. "He talked about it with me because I had known him before the fear was something he had to manage. When you grow up with someone, they cannot entirely hide themselves from you." He looked into the fire. "He talked about you in every call. He said you were going to be someone who understood things, not just facts, things, the difference between them." He paused. He was right. I sat with that for a long time. The fire cracked. The horses moved at the edge of the firelight. Chupa made the chittering sound, low and settled, and it echoed off the rock face above us and came back fuller, as if the mountain were answering in the same language. The stars over the Sierra were extraordinary. Not a sky you can see in a city, not a sky with light underneath it. Just the actual universe, unmediated, very old and very large, completely indifferent to the small fire and the horses and the 3 living things gathered around it. I looked at it for a long time. "I'm glad I came," I said. It surprised me when I heard myself say it. Chava looked at me across the fire. He smiled, the first real smile I had seen from him, not the careful courtesy he used with strangers, not the controlled expression of a man watching himself. A full smile which changed his face entirely, which I recognized immediately because I had seen it in the video on the workbench, 20 years younger, teaching my father something he was about to learn to do well. He would be glad, Chava said, that you came, that you are here. The second day was hard going, 500 meters of climbing through broken rock, no shade, sun flat and white by mid-morning. Chava rode without complaint, and I matched his pace and his silence, both of us conserving ourselves for the terrain ahead. There was a section around mid-climb where the trail narrowed to a ledge of loose shale above a steep drop, and I held my breath crossing it, watching Chava's horse pick its way across with the careful intelligence of an animal that has been trusted in difficult places before. My own horse followed. Some of the courage in the world is just the capacity to trust something more experienced than yourself. Around midday we stopped at a spring that surfaced from between two rock slabs and filled our canteens without talking. Chava sat on a flat rock and worked his shoulders slowly, one and then the other, the movement of a man taking honest inventory of himself and not willing to be dishonest about the findings. He was tired. He was managing it with dignity. When I offered to take his pack, he waved me off, which I expected, and we both left it at that. Chupa covered most of the distance in the air by that point, riding the strong updrafts off the south-facing rock faces, and watching him fly, sustained and powerful and completely in his element, was something I cannot adequately describe. The wings at full extension in mountain sunlight were not a color I had language for. Blues and greens and something past green, shifting as the angle changed, as the light changed, as he banked and caught a new current and rose 50 meters in a smooth, effortless arc. He was not a creature struggling to survive in a world that didn't fit him. He was exactly what he was, moving through the world on its own terms, oriented by instincts older than anything human, answering only to the wind and the thermals, and whatever internal compass brought him back to us each time he ranged ahead. He ranged far sometimes, half a kilometer more, and in those moments I lost sight of him against the rock faces and the open sky, and I felt a small cold thing move through me. Not quite fear, the awareness of what it would mean if he simply kept going. If he chose the sky over the arrangement we'd made, which was not really an arrangement at all. It was a hope, a gesture, two humans carrying poles through a streambed at 2 in the morning, and hoping that the creature in the net understood what was being attempted on its behalf. There was nothing that bound him to us. There was no contract. There was only the fact that he kept coming back, dropping out of the sky to walk beside the horses for a stretch before the thermals called him up again, and the fact of that, the simple repeated fact of his return, was the whole argument. It was a better argument than anything Quinn had put into words. We reached the high valley in the early afternoon of the second day. It was ancient. That is the only word that fits. A broad bowl in the high Sierra, sheltered on 3 sides by peaks that caught snow even in July, with a creek running clear over black rock through grass that had never been grazed. No roads, no structures, no marks. The ridgeline broke the sky at every compass point in a way that I understood instinctively would scatter any signal trying to read this valley from the outside. Too much iron in the rock, too much vertical relief, too many competing angles. Quinn's equipment would get noise, nothing more. Chupa landed ahead of us in the grass. He folded his wings and walked to the creek and drank, then raised his head and looked around at the peaks, at the grass, at the sky. He turned a slow circle, reading something I couldn't read. Then he made the sound, the long, low, resonant chittering, and it traveled out across the valley floor and came back from the rock faces changed and amplified, as if the valley itself were resonating in the same key. He looked back at us. Chava dismounted slowly, with the care of a man whose body has recorded every day of the last 2 days and is presenting the invoice. He stood and breathed and looked at the valley. "Will he be safe here?" I asked. He will find what he needs, Chava said. Things like him have been in these mountains longer than anyone has been searching for them. This is not a new place for them. We are the ones who had to remember to let them have it. I whistled, the soft two-note I had used in the barn to call him to the food plate. Chupa raised his head and looked at me across the grass. We held each other's eyes for a moment, the amber eyes with the expanding pupils, wide and warm and entirely present. I do not know what he understood. I will not claim to know what passes through a consciousness built differently from mine. But I know what it felt like to stand in that valley and look at him and feel that the understanding was mutual. Not the plan, not the logistics, not the words that couldn't be exchanged. The thing underneath those. The agreement that exists between two living things when they have stood together in the same difficulty, and come through it and know, without needing to articulate it, what they owe each other. He lowered his head. He turned and walked further into the valley, toward the far end where the creek bent around a dark rock face, unhurried, his wings held slightly open for balance, moving the way something moves when it is going home. He did not look back. He didn't need to. We camped one more night and rode out before dawn. The descent was easier on the legs and harder on everything else, and I didn't talk much on the ride down. By the time we came out of the stream bed and back onto the ranch property, I had processed as much as I was going to process for a while. The rest would take longer. Some of it would take years. That's how certain things work. Quinn was in the yard when we arrived. He had the extended warrant, 4 vehicles, 8 men, and equipment staged for a thorough systematic search of the ridge terrain. He searched. They were thorough and professional, and they found nothing. Because there was nothing to find, Chupa was 2,000 meters up in a valley that no survey map showed, behind a ridgeline that scrambled signals into static, in terrain that had kept its secrets longer than any of us had been alive. I watched the search from the porch, sitting in a chair Chava had put there years ago and not touched much, the wood worn smooth in the place his hands rested. Luna sat beside me. We did not speak. There was nothing useful to say, and both of us understood that, and I was grateful for the company of someone who understood silence as a form of solidarity rather than a failure of conversation. The men moved systematically. I will give Quinn credit for his professionalism. He ran the search the right way, gridded and thorough. No shortcuts, communicating with his people through earpieces in short, precise exchanges. He was good at his job. The job he was good at was wrong, but he was good at it. I thought about that for a while, sitting on the porch watching them work. The question of what it means when a person is skilled and disciplined and committed and pointed in a direction that is fundamentally mistaken. The answer, as far as I could tell, was that it just means more damage done more efficiently, and that skill without correct orientation is its own kind of tragedy. Quinn stood in the yard for a long time after his men came back empty-handed. He looked at Chava. He looked at me. He looked at the ridge, at the long line of it against the afternoon sky. "You know where it is," he said. "I know where many things are," Chava said. "We'll be back." "We'll be here," Chava said. Quinn drove away. I don't know what happened to him after that. I don't know whether the agency filed the valley under inconclusive or kept looking. I like to think there is a file somewhere that still reads no confirmed sightings, still open, still inconclusive, the case technically active and practically cold, a bureaucratic forever in place of an ending. We stood in the yard until the dust settled. Luna came out of the house. Memo was behind her, mask on his forehead, watching the track where the vehicles had gone. He said something in Spanish, quiet and certain. Luna was quiet for a moment, then she translated. "He says the important ones always come back." "Which ones?" I asked. She listened to Memo add something more. "The ones worth protecting," she said. I flew home a week later. The summer ended. School started. My mother was a little less careful around me by September, a little less logistics, a little more just present, a little more willing to sit in the same room without an agenda. I told her some of it, not all, enough to explain why I had come back different, or at least why I had come back with something in my face that hadn't been there before. I did not tell her about the valley. Some things you keep, not because they're secret but because they belong to the place they happened and lose something essential when you carry them too far into ordinary life. The valley existed. Chupa existed. The fire on the first night and my father's face in the old video, and Chava's hand on my shoulder at the door the first afternoon, and Memo saying his first English word in the dark at a cave mouth. Those things exist. They are as real as anything I own. More real than most. My father wanted the place to do some of the work. He wanted San Javier to show me something about where he came from before he explained it in words. I think the place did more than he planned for. I think maybe that is the thing nobody tells you about grief, that it does not end but it finds company. That the weight of it doesn't get lighter, you just stop carrying it alone. You find people who knew the same person or people who understand the same kind of loss without needing to explain it, and you can sit by a fire with them and let the silence mean what it means, and that is enough. It turns out that is more than enough. I went back the following summer, and the summer after, and every summer since. Chava is older now, slower on the ridge walks, but he goes twice a week and comes back with a particular expression that I have stopped asking him to explain. Memo is studying sports medicine, which seems right for the grandson of the Relampago Azul. Luna is doing field work in conservation biology in the Sierra, which also seems right, in a way that makes me wonder whether she always knew where she was headed, and the summer we spent hiding a creature from a government agency was the first leg of a journey she had already begun. I do not know if Chupa is still in the valley. I do not know how long things like him live, or whether they stay in one place or move through the high country according to some logic I have no access to. I do not know whether Quinn's agency ever found its way to other valleys, other creatures, other things they decided were resources before they decided they were lives. I know what we did. I know it was right. I know that when my father ran out of time, he left behind a grandfather and 2 cousins and a ranch in the Sonoran borderlands where something extraordinary had chosen to shelter, and that I arrived at the exact right moment, knowing nothing and carrying nothing but grief, and that the place gave me back something I had not known I'd lost. The things worth protecting never asked to be protected. He was right about that. He was right about most things eventually, once you had enough time to grow into them. But sometimes the things worth protecting find you anyway, in a barn, in the dark, in the small hours of a July night in a country you barely know, with amber eyes that widen toward you rather than away, and a sound like breathing in a language you are only just beginning to understand. And in that moment, without ceremony, without a plan, you find out exactly who you are. I know who I am. That is not a small thing to carry home.